welcome to the FSHR and Compliance Network webinar. And today we're going to be talking about digitalising the back office in financial services. I'm Zoe Foster, Chair of the network and also Head of Marketing and Events at our co-sponsor, Veran Performance. I hope you're all keeping well. It's really nice to see some familiar names in the list this morning. I thought we could begin with a quick poll to see where everyone is joining us from this morning. So you should see, let's just have a quick look. You should see a quick poll on the screen just to tell us where you're joining us from this morning. Oh, home, in the office. No one's in the car or on the train. When I put in the car, I meant hopefully you're not driving or you're on the train. Okay, so pretty much a good split there. I'm going to end the poll. Share the results with you. Yeah, so more than half of us are working from home, and we have a few in the office. So I think that's a good representation of really what everyone is doing at the moment. Hopefully going into the next year, 2022, which is just around the corner, impending. And I'm hoping that these events will go to back to in-person events in January, but we'll keep you posted, and hopefully you'll still be able to join us online, even if we are in person. So we'll have a bit of a hybrid thing going on. I am delighted that the network is going from strength to strength, particularly in the last year. We've actually increased our membership by more than 10% just this year alone, so between January and November this year, which means that the word is spreading, and our effort to provide more meaningful and thought-provoking insights is really paying off. And I thank the Veran team and also the Osborne Clarke team for helping me do that this year. And hopefully we can go from strength to strength again next year. So a bit of background for those that haven't been to our events before. We launched our not-for-profit organisation in early 2017 with a view to host free breakfast seminars for HR and compliance professionals working in financial services. And it was really for those who were looking to collaborate and understand how other HR and compliance teams in the industry were interpreting legislation that the FCA and PRA kept changing and were enforcing. So what started as a group of 10 or so compliance and HR professionals in a room, we've now grown to a group membership size of more than 4,500, and that represents more than 1,200 regulated businesses across the UK. So we're really proud of what we've achieved in the last 4 years or so. We have always had three key objectives for all of our seminars and webinars this year. And they are, the first is to understand the impact that new and changing legislation has on financial services businesses, hence why we always begin with a regulatory update at the beginning of each session. The second is to provide a space for you and your industry peers to collaborate and share best practice under Chatham House rules. And of course, that's really difficult on webinars, but obviously if you join our LinkedIn group, you'll be able to connect with other like-minded peers and anyone on the call today, and take your conversations offline and ask your questions between you there. And finally, and arguably most importantly, to promote a consistent approach to regulatory and non-regulatory challenges across the financial services industry as a whole. We are sponsored by two very engaging companies. The first is Veran Performance, the leading HR and finance technology and transformation consultancy for financial services and a few other industries as well. And Osborne Clarke, and they have the best strapline. I've always enjoyed it, and I think I say that on every webinar. But they are lawyers who live and breathe their sectors and businesses to give advice that is commercially on point and relevant, and help tackle the challenges you're facing today and prepare you for the ones that you will face tomorrow. So I really like that, and hopefully that resonates with a few people. And of course, James, Catherine and Olivia are all here today, and Tom Holmes from Veran as well. So if you have any questions about the network or our sponsors, get in touch with me afterwards, or of course, as I say, join our LinkedIn group and you'll be able to find out more there. Moving on to the agenda for this morning, I will shortly hand over to James Turner, who is a an associate director at Osborne Clarke, and James will be providing us with a regulatory update focusing on the FCA's regulatory initiatives grid and the perimeter report. James will then hand straight over to Tom Holmes, founding director of Veran Performance, and Tom will be chairing the panel session today and will be unpicking the reality of digitalising the back office and how it impacts important strategies, including diversity and inclusion, talent, recruitment, etc. Do use the chat and the Q&A buttons along the bottom of your screen. We'll answer them as we go. Tom is well versed in the realm of Zoom and we'll be able to check it as we go through. So if you have any questions, please post them. Otherwise, James, over to you.
Thanks very much, Zoe. 2 attempts to take myself off mute there. That's a great start, bearing in mind that I'm going to be sharing my screen in just a moment. You've got me for just shy of 10 minutes on the regulatory update today. And there are 2 things I want to talk about, and we'll just start with the FCA's perimeter report, which was published since we last got together. The perimeter report, for those that haven't seen it before, is very much the FCA's current thinking on what we refer to as the regulatory perimeter. And the perimeter is essentially delineates what is regulated from what is not regulated. And what's very new about this year's report, and the reason I wanted to touch on it, is actually it's an embodiment of some of the changes in approach that Nikhil Ratti is bringing to the FCA. Historically, the report's been a bit of a non-event, to be honest, but this year's report is very wide-ranging, really worth a read for firms in any market segment. It's very well laid out, so you can clearly you can very easily effectively put to one side anything that's completely irrelevant to you. But what's really interesting this year is the tone and approach taken in it. Historically, as I say, it's been a bit of a non-event because previous editions have been quite academic. This edition is quite an aggressive report in terms of the FCA assertively putting forward the case for new areas to be regulated, or rather for the perimeter to be extended in a certain way. And I just wanted to pick out a couple of examples. In insurance, the definition of insurance as a product is very much a legal construct that means that the FCA is quite reliant on court decisions to identify what is and isn't insurance. In the report, the FCA expresses its concerns that firms are effectively seeking to take advantage of what they term quite old legal decisions in a way, in such a way as to be able to argue that their products are not actually insurance products. And what's clear from the report is the FCA is not effectively going to leave this alone, and this is an area where they are looking to persuade the Treasury to actually change the law in order to increase the FCA's powers. Second example is the appointed representatives regime. Post the collapse of Greensill, this is a political issue with quite a few politicians not necessarily sure how deeply they understand the regime, but claiming that the regime needs reform. The important point from the report is the FCA is clearly convinced that the appointed representatives regime is, in its words, being misused, and therefore seeking both to take action that the FCA can take within its existing powers, so actually scrutinising firms seeking to use ARs at the point where they seek to apply to be authorised, but also the FCA is clearly persuaded of the need to change the underlying legislation in such a way as to make it effectively narrow the ability of firms to use the appointed representatives regime. That will have quite significant implications for businesses, particularly mortgage advisors, for example, and other IFAs. Thirdly, one of my favourite topics, crypto assets, where obviously this is a massively fast-moving area in which, frankly, we could have a weekly meeting on crypto and there'd be something to say. Nothing in the report itself is particularly new, except for, and this is certainly the first time I've seen this particular analysis, firms that are currently required to register with the FCA as a money laundering supervisor who deal in crypto assets, the FCA states in the report that most of the applications were of inadequate quality. We know that only 12 of firms have actually been so registered, having gone through the process. But I think it's for those looking to move or expand a crypto asset business, I think it's clear that the FCA is going to be testing the limits of its own powers very assertively in that field. Do take a look. It's the perimeter report. It's easy to find on the FCA's website. Lots of interesting things. And as I say, the embodiment of the new tone of the FCA, in which they don't regard themselves as a passive observer of the perimeter, but very much as a stakeholder driving perimeter discussions. And speaking of our friends over at the FCA, my second item I just wanted to touch on, and this is a demonstration, because I'm not sure how widely people are familiar with the regulatory initiatives grid. I have to say, when I first saw it in its original form, which was May 2020, I did think to myself, I don't know whether the FCA are being helpful or simply seeking to put regulatory change teams in big institutions out of a job, because certainly in previous roles I've had, I've seen large teams doing what the FCA have now done and put into the public domain themselves. So I'm now going to risk it all technologically by sharing my screen so that I can show you and actually demo how the grid works, because in all seriousness, it is fantastically useful resource. Here goes nothing. Now, I'm very much hoping, and please, Zoe or Olivia or Tom, shake your head frantically if you can't see anything. We're on the FCA's website, and this is, as I say, I think this is just phenomenally helpful. I really wish they'd done this 15 years ago, frankly. But I'll just show you. So this is the Regulatory Initiatives Grid overview. There is a PDF version, and which you can download, print, flick through at your leisure. But actually what I think is particularly useful is the amount of effort the FCA have actually put into making this data easily accessible. The initiatives grid, for those who've not seen it before, is literally a timeline actually co-owned by a number of regulators, HMT, the Payment Systems Regulator, the Competition and Markets Authority, etc., showing effectively everything coming down the track from a financial services perspective. So if I click into the overview, what you can actually do is either filter it by regulator. So if I just show you how we can filter it by FCA. And then it literally demonstrates by sector. It also has an impact. You can look at it by time. And this is actually, as I say, this is phenomenally useful. You can see actually the sheer scale of regulatory change coming down the track, because this is everything. It goes on for ages. But this is, as I say, a fantastically, I really commend it to everyone. When you hover over the little sections, you actually get a bit more information about each individual one. The one thing I'd say is I'm not completely sure I agree with all of their impact assessments. There are a couple in there that they have low, where my eyebrows hit the ceiling at that point. But if you've not seen this before, or you think there are people in your organization who'd benefit from seeing this, I really recommend it. I won't go into any of the specifics on it today, because as I say, absolutely everything you can think of is on there. But I did want to see it because I've certainly had a few conversations since this version was published with people who weren't aware of it. I will now stop sharing. Well, brilliant. I'll give myself a pat on the back for all of that going, and hand straight over to Tom for today's panel discussion.
Thanks, James. That was really useful. So morning, everybody. I'm delighted this morning to be hosting this panel session for the group. Please, during the session, use the Q&A button to send in any questions or conversations. So at the bottom, you'll see there's a chat function. So just click on that and do that. So with me this morning, I have Olivia Sinfield, who is partner at Osborne, Clarke, and has more than 16 years experience of advising on issues arising during the employment life cycle, and prides herself on giving practical, accessible and user-friendly, no-nonsense, pragmatic and commercial advice. Thank you, Olivia. I'm looking forward to something. We also have Cairene Hammon. Welcome, Cairene. A digital transformation knowledge lawyer, also with Osborne Clarke. So Cairene was named Lawyers Hot 100 Distributors on Lawyers Hot 100 Disruptors list in 2019. And her work with the wider HR transformation team at Osborne Clarke was commended in the Financial Times Innovative Lawyers Europe 2020 Awards. Congratulations, Cairene, and welcome. Finally, we have the brilliant Cairene Gilbert, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Handelsbanken, who some of you may recognise from previous seminars, and Cairene has been participating in this panel session to provide her expertise on D&I and also her passionate interest in social mobility and the need to create opportunity in the workplace for all people, irrespective of their background. So welcome, Cairene. And I'm Tom Holmes, founding director of Veran Performance, leading digital transformation consultancy, and also founder actually of this group. And what we do is focus on digital transformation of the back office for financial services and the compliance industry. So I feel that we've got the right panel to talk about digital transformation in financial services this morning, and I'm delighted to kick off with a definition actually of what is digital transformation, and I guess why should we care about it at all. So everyone's talking about digital transformation across all industries, and it is also clearly top of the agenda, or getting top of the agenda in financial services. So what actually is it? So I've taken a definition today from enterpriseproject.com, which is actually a very useful website in this area, enterpriseproject.com. And their definition of digital transformation is the integration of digital technology into all areas of a business, fundamentally changing how we operate and deliver value to our customers. They point out it is also a cultural change that requires organization to continually challenge the status quo, experiment, and interestingly, get comfortable with failure. So with that definition, I'm going to start off by, in essence, if we break it all down, it's moving from our static systems, our systems which have been in-house and have stayed the same for many years, into a world which is fast changing, digitalized, and will continue to change. And if we take that definition, that's why we wanted to talk about it today, because it's so critical for both our back office HR groups and also for our compliance groups, because it's been something which has been front of house for a while and is now moving into the back office, etc. So Cairene, could you tell us a bit about the trends you're seeing, and indeed a bit about the latest governmental reports on this area describing what digital transformation impact is going to be? So Cairene.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, so I think one of the biggest trends, and this, so thinking about the government report that's just came out last month, one of the biggest trends I think is the increasing use of artificial intelligence and the extraordinary tools which can be used more or less in anything you could think of. Artificial intelligence can boost things. It's been called the new electricity. It's even been called the new air, and it's been described as something which actually is becoming so ubiquitous that you almost don't notice it. That there's artificial intelligence in, the most obvious example, I haven't got mine to hand, but is our phones. We carry around extraordinary quantities of artificial intelligence, which we just simply don't notice. And the report that you referenced it was published by Bayes at the beginning of October, in early October, and it's called The Potential Impact of AI on UK Employment and the Demand for Skills. And what it was looking to investigate was whether this transformation, that the AI-driven transformation will create structural change in labour markets, and how large the change will be and what form it will take. Excuse me. I think one of the really interesting things about the report is that actually it finds that there won't be mass technical unemployment. So this wonderful idea that we won't need to work because the tools will do it all for us, that's probably a bit over optimistic. But what it does find is that the work that we do is going to shift. It's going to change. There's a very good phrase which was coined by Garry Kasparov, the chess player, the chess grandmaster, one of the first people to be beaten in their core role by a computer, if you like, by Deep Blue back in the late 90s, I think it was. So he's had sort of 20 years of knowing what it's like to be up against the bots, and he calls it menial cognition. AI is fantastic at menial cognition. So those kind of repetitive, not very interesting, got to be done with intelligence and thought, but not actually very interesting. That's perfect for shifting to across to artificial intelligence. And what the report finds, in fact, is that administrative tasks are one of the areas which is going to be impacted by AI, and where we may find that some reskilling and some restructuring is needed. And one of the other factors that's really important, particularly from thinking about this from an HR perspective, is that they found that by 2030, the estimate was that there will be 7 million people in the workplace who are underskilled, and that we need a new set of tasks, because some of the tasks can be passed to the bots, past the menial cognition to the bots. It doesn't need to be artificial intelligence. It can be things like robotic process automation, where you just get sort of data being transferred by a software algorithm rather than by a data entry person. So we are expecting change, and it comes with these various different angles. Some sectors will be more affected than others, but there will in particular be this sort of need for reskilling and retooling some parts of the workforce in order to be ready for the future.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm really interested in the term menial cognition. It kind of, as you mentioned it, it made me realize actually how much of my work is actually menial cognition. And I guess what that means is, an awful lot of the compliance work which James has been giving us the update on is actually going out and checking basic things. That's a menial cognition task. However, I feel insulted by the Bayes' description of it. It is indeed what I spend a lot of time doing. So I'm guessing you're thinking that the impact on us in HR and in compliance is going to be very significant over the next years.
Well, I think where you have sort of processes and systems, I think one of the tricks for where to look for automation, and as you say, we all do a lot of this stuff in our everyday task, and particularly in the junior levels, that's often these tasks are important and they need to be done sensibly and thoughtfully, which is why in the past we've given in our thinking of our world of law, a lot of those sort of tasks go to our junior lawyers because they need to be done thoughtfully and carefully, and occasionally a tricky question comes up and you need people to be ready to respond to that. But on the whole, it's fairly repetitive, and it's those kind of repetitive tasks, we're doing the same thing again and again. That's where in many ways we ought to be looking to automate, because it frees us up for the curious and creative tasks that we all also have to do, and which are more interesting and more engaging and more give us more a sense of sort of adding value to the work that we do. So I think it's important to keep these things in perspective, that it's not just half our work will be taken by the bots, but it'll take away the more repetitive, tedious parts of our work and open us up to more creative, more thoughtful bits of work.
It's very interesting, the report you refer to. This is the Bayes report, and I'm sure we'll post a copy of it because it is worth everybody taking a look at. But it's almost, its tense is interesting because it doesn't talk about if and when. It's kind of like it describes what is happening and what will happen. This is a definite activity which has already occurred in many areas of our business and is moving into the back office area. And I think that's why that's quite unusual for a government report. Actually, it's not forward looking, it's actually saying this is what is happening, I think, Catherine.
Yeah, that's right. And you can see it that so the administrative tasks that they mention will be changed. The time frame for that is they're sort of saying 5 to 10 years time we'll see a lot of change in administrative tasks. Right now they're seeing change in consumer services. And if you think about whenever you go onto any website, consumer facing websites for services, there's almost always a chatbot in the corner. And there's almost always, and sometimes it's presented to you as your bot, and sometimes it's presented to you as so-and-so from customer services. But that kind of automation is hugely increasing, and we see it going on all around. And I saw a chat comment about how difficult it can be to automate things. Yeah, the fact that the problem might not be difficult enough to change. I think the point here is really that what we see across digital transformation is that being defensive, doing it when you've got to because your competitors have done it or it's starting to impact the bottom line, you've got no choice. That doesn't tend to be where the winners are found. The winners are found amongst the businesses that self-disrupt and embrace digital transformation as something that can power productivity, can power forward better results, can power forward. I do think it's important to remember this perspective of actually empowering the workforce to have those, to get rid of the menial cognition. Nobody loves doing that stuff. Nobody loves it. Brilliant. I've got a whole day of data checking. This is going to be an amazing day. Nobody loves that stuff. So let's be positive about it and remember that this can be taking these things on proactively and with a positive sort of approach to how it can, improve everybody's working day it can be a really good starting point to address all of this from.
It has, your comment there, Catherine, has actually made me reflect on how often I see the chatbot, the help, and the other activities bottom right when I'm working in a front office consumer-based role, and how infrequently I see them when I'm filling in data, etc., internally to a business so far. And I imagine that's the next place which we're going. I mean, I think about some of the forms and things which we ask our teams to complete for compliance and other checks, and how infrequently we actually see that support coming electronically from a chatbot, etc. And from my perspective, how clearly I can now see that that's going to occur over the next months and years, that it's going to start being there too, and how good that will be.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, there are loads and loads of things we could talk about in digital transformation. There's loads of technical questions, there's loads of impact questions, etc. But today, I thought we should focus on two aspects which are more related to our roles in HR and compliance. And they are actually focusing on D&I, and then the mindset change that we need to work with our colleagues and teams, which they need to undertake to get to this new place and really embrace digital transformation as a kind of benefit. So, Cairene, as specialist in D&I, what are some of the practical aspects we need to consider and the impact on D&I and the challenges that we should be aware of?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And that was a great intro, Catherine. Thank you. So I guess for the first thing we need to understand is the digital economy is now the economy. It enables new ecosystems, makes new business models, and opens up new ways to kind of interact with and engage with our customers. But the digital economy is inherently different from the established economy. And many established businesses today have foundations that were built in the last century. And the corporate world is still primarily defined by baby boomers, if we can, say that. A group which kind of entered the workforce before mobile phones existed, personal computers, and even the internet. And if we think about millennials, they have a very different expectation of the working world. They are used to global 24 hours a day working, seamless and transparent interaction, and importantly, they are digital natives. So we know that the workforce has got multi-generational people within them, often spanning 3 or 4 age brackets. And I think this is why diversity is really important. And I can't take credit for this quote, but I'm going to share it. And I wish I really knew who I really wish I could remember who said it. But we need to view diversity as our digital age superpower. And I think that's a really interesting quote. And I am, as I said, disappointed that I can't remember who said it, but great term, I think. If we look at digital within the D&I space, it gives us greater accessibility. We've got, a lot more people working from home. The physical barriers that were present in the office fall away. If you think about it, all that's needed to be productive is a PC, a broadband connectivity, and a good set of collaboration tools. And I think this opens up the workforce to those who might be physically or have social challenges. So I think that also expands our pipeline of talent. So that would be kind of some of the first things that I would say. And if we think about the digital economy, it's borderless. And with many kind of business operating worldwide, their workforces have become global as well. So I think we have to be mindful that internet technologies are the key driver here, but collaboration platforms add another important layer. We need HR to really work together. We need HR teams to understand the benefits of diverse teams and be willing to kind of work harder to find diverse candidates. We need our facilities teams to create office spaces which are welcoming for all generations. And we need IT teams to give multiple technology options to sort of suit different working styles. And most important of all, we need business leaders to ensure that all of this is a priority rather than a nice to do in the future.
Yes, I mean, I love that, Cairene. That's really lovely. That diversity is our digital age superpower. But I kind of think about it, it's one of these superpowers which also has the potential to not drive inclusivity, because you're absolutely right. Any one of us can set up in any space and work, but not all of us are equally able or willing or technically skilled to be able to do that. So I guess that's an area which we can hand over to Olivia to ask her a little bit about. So it's a double-edged sword, Olivia, right? It's kind of like, yeah, this could be the driver for inclusivity and diversity, but equally it cuts the other way as well, which is people can be excluded. So what are your thoughts from a legal perspective and non-legal perspective on that, Olivia?
Yeah, thanks, Tom and Cairene. That was really, really interesting. And I think there is certainly another side to this. But before I come across as a bit of a doomsayer, I do agree with Tom where you started from, where you were talking about tech having the potential to radically transform our world of work for the better. And I completely agree with that. And that will impact on us all. And the way I see it now is that all of our businesses we're all essentially tech and data companies or are on that journey to becoming such. And we really all need to be seeing ourselves as that so that we're not left behind. When it comes to D&I, completely agree, Cairene, with everything you were saying there. I think there's a whole load of positives, but as ever, where there's this yin, there's a yang. And I think because of the yang, which I'll talk a little bit about, I think, and it's completely agreeing with your point again, Cairene, that it's absolutely essential that D&I considerations are really hardwired into tech implementation. And I agree with you as well that they are the digital age superpower. So just looking at some of the other side, I think you've got on the one extreme, we need to be alert to the fact that tech can actively discriminate. So, for example, because of COVID, we've seen a really great investment in the workplace in things like monitoring software and non-touch tech like facial identity software. And we know, and there's been a lot of press coverage around this, that sort of tech isn't always accurate when it comes to recognizing things like skin color. There are other not quite as blatant, but still problematic issues around this as well. So one risk we need to be really alive to is that tech can leave behind certain sectors of the workforce when it comes to that skills transformation piece that Catherine was talking about there. And there's some really interesting stats here that I can throw out from The Economist, so they are reliable. But for example, when looking at gender, so for every 1,000 female grads, apparently only 24 have an ICT related degree and only 6 go on to digital jobs. I think that's quite staggering in terms of statistics. And The Economist also found that women leave careers involving the use of tech at a much higher rate than their male peers because of limited progression and opportunities. And so that's gender. You can look at age as well. So digital jobs and digital skills are still seen often as being the preserve of the young, which that's really problematic at the moment at a time when we're seeing the aging of the working population. And if there's this perception that older workers are less able to do these tech-driven jobs, then potentially we're excluding a huge section of the workforce and really fueling what we're seeing at the moment in terms of the current skills shortage. And then finally, the one other angle, I think, on the sort of more the side we have to be concerned about and really aware about is the negative consequences that can stem from where we see AI being used without that really critical injection of human interaction. So I'm hearing, for example, of situations where women are having to cancel their care responsibilities because of last minute automated shift scheduling, or where disabled workers are having to leave their jobs because they're not able to perform against these automated preset standards. So I think it's really important that we need to have people communicating with each other to take account of people's specific circumstances and build that in, because that's something that tech still isn't able to do it in the same way. And again, without that human element, we are risking excluding certain sectors of the workforce from access to jobs.
So if I understand that, Olivia, we ultimately are going to need to prepare ourselves and our teams for this change. And actually that preparation is really important because of the threat which Cairene's talked about on driving inclusion in the way we want to, and diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's crucial we take steps to overcome it, because as AI is going to continue to become more sophisticated, we're going to be entrusting it with really high level decisions around performance, recruitment and retention. So it's critical that we're taking these positive steps now to ensure that the digital transformation piece is inclusive of everybody.
And yet I can see the kind of benefits of doing that, because, thinking about James' chart with the what look like hundreds of changes which are occurring to our world in compliance over the next kind of year or two, I was thinking it is an area of constant change. And so I think that, what we're describing, and certainly how we describe it in Veran Performance, is that what we're trying to do is create a mindset change which allows people to more easily embrace a digitalized future, and a future in which things are changing all of the time. Something which many of us, and the groups you were describing, Cairene, are not used to in their past, etc. We used to have a regulatory framework which largely would stay the same. We used to have an HR framework where we define the questions and apply those questions and then keep applying them for years and years and years. And yet we're now seeing something where that mindset that it's constantly changing, etc., is becoming, critical to our menial cognition tasks we do in our back office areas. So I do think there's and what we use a lot is learning from the front office, because in the front office, our team members and colleagues are used to product changes, regulatory changes with the products they're offering their customers, etc., all of the time. So regular updates, ways of creating everybody in the team up to speed with those product changes, so that then they can represent those fairly to their customers, etc. But driving that mindset in the back office is probably quite different from doing it in the front office. So that critical mindset change is, to my mind, the most important challenge of digital transformation. And I want to kind of explore with the panelists how we bridge that gap to get our colleagues in the back office as used to change and adopting that new kind of SaaS mindset, thinking about what it's like to be in a digital world and embracing it over time. So Catherine, what are your thoughts in this area in terms of helping our teams to adopt that new mindset?
So I think transformation can sound quite daunting, and I think part of the mindset is not being daunted by it. And I think what we see with transformation is that the visions can be very wide-ranging, can be transformative by definition, hopefully are transformative, and we know that fortune favors the bold in this context, as I was saying earlier. But I think the reality down at ground level, what we see is that digital transformation takes a huge amount of hard work, sustained, and it takes a long time. There's a fantastic quotation that you often see in this context, which comes from a Hemingway novel, and one of his characters was asked, "How did you go bankrupt?" And he said, "Well, gradually and then suddenly." And digital transformation kind of happens like that, because it tends to be actually on a day-to-day basis, it's quite incremental and the changes are quite small. And particularly, you mentioned the SaaS mindset. If you compare the old-fashioned downloadable on-premise software that we all used to use, and then you compare that to the SaaS version, the cloud version, the sort of subscription version, just thinking about, shifting from having all of your MS Office tools, Windows and stuff on your laptop, not a very HR example, but an Office example, you've got all those Microsoft things on your laptop and they get upgraded. And every now and then we used to have a massive retool where we all had to learn shift from one version of Windows to the next and shift from one, and it was all a massive relearning. Whereas now that we're on Office 365, things just change a little bit. There's a constant little trickle of change, and actually it's, in some ways, it's easier to embrace when it happens in that kind of incremental, gradual way. There's a quotation from Bill Gates, which is very sort of same and different to the Hemingway one. We overestimate how much we can achieve in 2 years, but we underestimate how much we can achieve in 10 years. So I think that's one of the important contexts to think about this. And I think, it's quite interesting. If you see digital transformation in isolation, it can be a massive change. But actually, in our working lives, we've got constant change going on. If you go, what the change that we've had over the last sort of decade, we've got the aftermath of the financial crash. Then we've got all of that trying to work out how we all reorganize everything in the aftermath of that. Then we've had much more recently, obviously, we've had the incredible change of the pandemic. Then we've got digital transformation going on. We've also got the massive shift that we all need to make for decarbonisation. So change is a constant in our lives. It just may not have had this kind of digital emphasis in the way that it's getting at the moment. So I think that's one of the really important things, is that digital change is often, it will end up being transformative, but on a day-to-day basis, it can be much more sort of digestible than it might perhaps at first seem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Catherine. What are your thoughts, Olivia, on recruitment and talent, actually, in this area?
Yeah, well, first of all, Tom, just to really picking up from what Catherine was saying, I've got a really good example of transformation and change of mindset in practice in Levi's. Other genes are available, by the way, but they wanted to do exactly the sort of thing we're talking about here and to improve their front and back office digital capabilities. So the way they went about it, they didn't reach out in terms of recruitment and bring in new data engineers. What they did is they brought in people from retail, from distribution centres, from their warehouses, who had absolutely no experience in coding or stats, but had tons of experience in how their business works. And they put them all through a machine learning boot camp. So the emphasis was very much on the training piece. They built on their amazing retail skills and kind of supercharged them with digital knowledge. And that worked phenomenally well. So what we're seeing is some of our clients adopt a similar kind of approach, where because they're experiencing at the moment challenges in bringing in new people with these sort of technical skills they're looking for, they're turning instead to try and really harness the talent they've already got. So they're putting in place a process of skills mapping and looking at what skills they think they need as a business going forwards, and matching that against where those capabilities already sit within the organization. And that sometimes involves moving people around, and sometimes those capabilities may be hidden in people's current day-to-day roles. So it's really about trying to get beneath the surface of that and explore where those skills, those talents really lie.
Cairene, what's your experience of actually doing this at Handelsbanken? So what are the challenges you've faced and how are they coming on?
Yeah, no, great question. And I love that Levi's example. And I think that's just a really good example of the way businesses should consider, upskilling and their current workforce. So I think it's great. I think from a Handelsbanken perspective, I think, like many organisations, COVID has really accelerated our digital way of working. It's literally kind of changed overnight. The things that would have normally taken us weeks, months to kind of move forward, it's kind of happened in a matter of days. And for us within the bank, I would say we've had a real focus on inclusion. And of course, we need to attract the diverse pool of candidates, but underpinning all of this is inclusion. So as an example of that, what we have done is we've reviewed our the way we kind of also developed and trained our people. And, it was traditional classroom training, which was kind of ordinarily 9 to 5, so it wasn't, inclusive in the sense of everybody being able to attend because of, many reasons, including kind of caring responsibilities, etc. So what we've done at the bank is we've really taken a step back and reviewed it, looked at what the demographics of our organisation is, with a view then to look at a blended learning approach. And that really enables all employees to learn at a time that is right for them. So as well as the content review, we're really looking at how do we enable our employees to kind of develop in a way that suits them. So that's one of the things that we're certainly doing within the organisation.
I think, Cairene, you kind of mentioned a really interesting point there, which is the impact of the COVID crisis. And you were describing it as actually accelerating some things. And I think that's really true. I wonder whether, do you feel that our teams are better able and better prepared for this kind of digital transformation because of the experience of fast change and necessary change during COVID?
It should certainly give us the confidence that we can move things a lot quicker than what we did before. That's certainly what I would say. But I think, I think there's pros and cons. I think we've got lots to learn, but I think we have to take the good from the last 18 months and really use that to kind of move the digital piece forward.
I do feel that your confidence is something which a lot of the commentators I talk to, a lot of HRDs talk about, that actually by being forced in not greater circumstances to radically change the way we work and the way we think about work and the tools we use, that it's generated more confidence amongst our teams and colleagues to be able to do that. And I think that's fascinating and an acceleration.
Yeah, and I think it's also the way employees and line managers interact is very different now. So a lot more conversation happening from the ground up as opposed to kind of that adult parent conversation. So I think that's something positive that we should use as well to make sure that we're really understanding from the ground up.
Now that's very interesting as well, because that command and control culture, which has been very strong, particularly in our middle office and back offices, is actually been somewhat eroded during the last couple of years. Yeah. I mean, I remember back in the day, I wouldn't move my pot plant from the left-hand side of my table to the right-hand side of my desk at work without asking permission, kind of thing. Yeah. And that's all gone away, right? People are discovering how to do things, and they're having to use the tools in the best possible way and set things up so that they can work. I mean, potentially it's a huge freedom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to embrace it. It's an opportunity to change. Yeah.
Yes, and the idea that we can then, as managers and leaders, focus on the things which are important, but leave the things which are less important to individual decisions, I think is very exciting, actually.
Absolutely, yeah. I could not agree more.
Good. So now, back to a legal perspective. So I'm going to ask Catherine and Olivia to comment on what are the regulations and other legal perspectives we need to be thinking about. Shall we start with you, Catherine?
Sure, thank you. So there's one in particular that I'm going to highlight, which is having talked about artificial intelligence at the beginning of this discussion. The European Union has draft regulation for AI tools coming down the line. It's currently going through the legislative process, and it is very controversial, and there are some very big interests in play. So it's not moving through the legislative process very fast. We're not sure when it will be finally issued. It won't be enforced for a couple of years realistically, but it's coming down the line, and it will impact significantly on how AI tools are built and how they are managed and how they're run. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because the focus is on AI tools where the Commission sees the highest risk. And that's risk in two senses: risk in the sense of health and safety. So any AI tool which is feeding into health and safety of human beings is going to be affected by this regulation, but also where the artificial intelligence tool is relevant to the fundamental rights of human beings. And the workforce obviously is protected by a huge amount of legislation around workers' rights. And so AI tools in the workplace are going to be one of the focus areas where there is pretty significant and pretty heavy regulation around these tools. So in particular, I'll just remind myself here, so AI tools used for recruitment or selection of natural persons, we've talked about that already, how these tools can be, the problem with AI is it only knows what you tell it. And we've been talking about the importance of diversity. If you tell AI that you want to recruit people who are successful in your organization, it will recruit in their image, and it won't have the AI is very often use this phrase, AI is fantastically clever and also fantastically dumb. It only knows what you tell it, and it can only do what it's patterned to do. So you can't use, you would have to use AI very cleverly to get it to promote diversity, if you like, because that's not what it's designed to do. It's designed to repeat the patterns that it's been shown, which if your organization wasn't a diverse organization, that's going to create a challenge for how it does future recruitment. So recruitment tools are going to be relevant, are going to be regulated. Screening and filtering application tools are going to be relevant. Evaluating candidates through interviews, that's going to be regulated. And then also once people are into, so that's the kind of recruitment side of things. Once people are in the workplace, tools used for decisions on promotion, on termination, tools used for task allocation, tools used for evaluating performance and behaviors. All of that is seen as feeding into how AI could go wrong, is seen as feeding into the fundamental rights of those workers. And so that's all going to be part of this regulatory framework. Now that's the EU. In the UK, there isn't at the moment a plan for something similar, but there is a white paper coming out I think in the new year about how we should regulate AI in the UK. Previously, there wasn't this kind of overarching cross-sector approach going to be taken, but they're going to pause and just check whether we should do something similar in the UK. So that's the main one I wanted to mention, that these tools, which are very powerful and can be very time-saving, can also create these big problems that we've been throwing up. And so they're going to be quite heavily regulated, certainly in the EU and question mark in the UK.
Very interesting, and I get the focus on health and safety and fundamental rights originally, but presumably consumer rights, financial protections will be following along. I'm imagining, as the impact on those areas is. Well,
certainly for I think for consumer rights, one of the notable things is really that you ought to know that you're interacting with AI. So we were talking about those chatbots previously. Sometimes it's obvious from the answers that it's a robot and not a human being, but you should always be told when you're interfacing with an artificial intelligence tool, for example. On the financial services side, one of the I'm just flicking down my list here. One of the creditworthiness scoring tools, for example, again, because that feeds into people's ability to live their lives, have cash, be funded, etc. You can see that that's got that kind of, it could have a potentially very adverse impact on people if those tools aren't run properly and thoughtfully and managed properly. So
right.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting, and I can imagine that form of regulation is going to be kind of following quick behind, because although it's not a fundamental right, it pretty much nearly is, credit risks and credit scoring, etc. I was just reflecting on your thing that you normally know when you're talking to AI. Good for you, Catherine. I'm quite the reverse. I think, oh, this is a very human and natural conversation, and then I discover it is AI.
I ask it a difficult question and you'll find it grinds to a halt. That's what I find.
That's what I need a lawyer for, yes. Olivia, what are your thoughts on the legal dimensions? What else do we need to be thinking about apart from that?
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so just kind of very much surface level, but I think just to touch briefly on two issues we haven't mentioned yet, two very different issues, so mental health and data protection. On the mental health side, you touched, Tom, on the role of COVID in all of this, and I think if we look at impact pre-COVID, the main impact of tech was around substitution of labour, whereas now we're seeing dramatically increased use of algorithmic surveillance, whether it's in recruitment, when monitoring workers, setting performance targets, all sorts of areas. And there's a real concern that this kind of pervasive monitoring and real targeting technologies has the potential to have a real negative impact on employees' mental health, because if you think about it, the extreme pressure we're putting people under in terms of constant real-time micromanagement. And you know, you're probably gathering, as we're lawyers, we love a report. Catherine's already told you about one. There's another that's been published recently by an all-party parliamentary group on the future of work, chaired by David Davis. It's got a very Star Trek sounding title, so it's called The New Frontier, Artificial Intelligence at Work. But what this does is it really draws conclusions around actually the use of AI. It says the quoting from it has significant negative impacts on the conditions and quality of work across the country. And some of the conclusions the report found is that people don't understand how their personal information is being used by AI. There's a real absence of ways of challenging these decisions and seeking redress. And overall, and slightly worryingly, it found that there are low levels of confidence in the ability to hold businesses accountable. So these are the kind of things that when implementing tech, it's really useful to have these in mind so that we can start addressing these sorts of issues. Briefly on the data protection side, you probably saw early in the year that Uber came unstuck and were ordered to pay over €100 in damages to 6 drivers in the Netherlands, but I think most of them were actually based in the UK, whose contracts were terminated by Uber following inaccurate tech-driven decisions that suggested there'd been fraudulent activity when there hadn't been. The problem there is that Uber had failed to provide the drivers with proper evidence to support the allegations, and the decisions were based solely on automated processing. So we've got to really have at the forefront of our minds that there needs to be human involvement in all of this. We need to be thinking about introducing AI assisted decision making rather than AI only decision making. You know, ultimately nobody should be hired or fired by an algorithm.
Now, I was going to ask each of our panelists for one tip and comment, but we're kind of out of time, as Olivia said. So what I'd like to do is thank all 3 of you for what I thought was a really interesting debate. We will try and publish the materials on our website and send those out so that you can all see the materials which were mentioned during today. I suspect that's going to be a growing list. So thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Cairene. Thank you, Olivia. That was really great debate. Zoe, over to you.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you, panelists. That was really, really interesting. And what I'll do is I'll grab your one key takeaway for our audience today and pop that in the summary email at the end. So thank you very much. We will be back in January. We did have a question that came up during the seminar about IFPR. I was actually just talking to James about that before the session, and we think we're going to do a focus session on IFPR for investment firms between now and Christmas, because it is coming up on the 1st of Jan, the deadline. So if you are interested in coming along to that, please drop me an email so I can ensure that you get the invitation. Otherwise, our usual FSHR and compliance seminars will be back in January. And I hope you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them all in email, all of our panelists today. And thank you all again for coming, and thank you again to our panelists. So I'll see you soon.